Well, good afternoon to everyone that's out there watching us from our app and those of you that are going to tune in later today. I am beyond excited for this panel of ladies, so much so that I'm going to get off in a minute and turn it over to them. But they are making true transformation across the nation, and they're going to share some of those tips. And so I'm so excited for those that have chose to tune in today and learn from these ladies. I mean, they are just phenomenal. And the irony is, it wasn't intentional that they were all women, but I do think that they're going to have some special tips coming from that way. And so for those of you out there, I'm Joy Briscoe. I'm the executive director of the 24/7 Black Leadership Advancement Consortium. And we are a nonprofit dedicated to advancing economic vitality for Black communities in the Midwest. The Midwest currently has some of the highest rates of disparity when it comes to Black-owned businesses, when it comes to home ownership, and when it comes to salaries and livable wages than any other region. I think right now, according to a 24/7 Wall Street report, out of the top 20 worst places for disparities, 13 of those areas are in the Midwest. And so we're an organization that's being very intentional about working to improve those conditions with focus and being unapologetic and saying that we're giving uplift and light to Black communities. And so I'm excited because if you're out there, that means that you understand that this is important and that there's a necessary focus on that work. And again, you're going to get some great tools for your toolbox today, this afternoon. I also want to thank some of our sponsors. I mean, we can't do this work at the level we've been able to do it without great supporters like you. So US Bank, Community Foundation of Northeast Iowa, Community Bank and Trust, Hy-Vee, and UNI John Papa John Entrepreneurial Center. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support, as well as our presenting sponsor. This was a wonderful surprise, but Care Initiatives, you're actually our presenting sponsor this year, and thank you as well. And so with that said, get ready, get your seatbelts on, because you're about to go on a phenomenal educational ride on equity that I hope you'll be able to put in practice at your own organizations and in your community. Sharina, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joy, for inviting me to moderate this panel today. I too am excited for this conversation. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Sharina Salas. I am the sitting president for 24/7 Black Leadership Advancement Consortium. And I get the honor and privilege to working with Joy every day. However, I do get to work on occasion with these ladies that are featured on your screens and that they'll introduce themselves momentarily. I'm too ready for this conversation, right? Because there's not a whole lot of spaces where we can just really come together and just have a for real conversation about this. So that's what I hope that you get today. Once these ladies start talking and introducing themselves, you'll understand why they were chosen for this panel. They are phenomenal. And I think we should just go ahead and get started and we'll just jump right in. Thank you, ladies, for being here today. And thank you for saying yes. I truly, truly, truly appreciate that. Um, I've read your resumes. I've seen your LinkedIn profiles. I've actually been stalking a couple of you. And on occasion, I get to work with you. Like Alex, I get to work with you every day. But this is a whole different dynamic of me seeing you in this light. Would you take a brief moment to introduce yourselves, give a little bit of your background, what your current jobs is, and I'll just call you out in order. So Ashley, you're first on my screen if you would go next, and then we'll have Naira and Alex.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and share space with dynamic Black women in the field. So I appreciate the opportunity. I am Ashley Spivey. My pronouns are she, her, and I am located actually in Omaha, Nebraska. And my work has kind of been cyclical. So I started out doing direct service in the social sector for workforce development, educational equity. I then moved to the organizational development side of nonprofits. So I was a diversity officer, director of HR, and then moved over to the philanthropic side. So kind of made a full life cycle circle. And I worked for two private foundations, one based in Nebraska and one based in Kansas City. I am now currently at US Bank, and so I'm working on a new strategy around Black wealth creation and entrepreneurship, but also started a community-based organization that focuses on Black women, femmes, and girls. And we do have a philanthropic arm. So hopefully, and I'm a business owner. So like, I'm also thinking about all the stuff that I had to navigate and what does it mean, right? From all the spaces that you're working. So hopefully I bring all those perspectives into the conversation today. And again, I'm really excited to be here.
All right, thank you so much. I'm starting to wonder, when do you sleep? Dang, you named off a lot of stuff. I feel like I got to get myself together. I'm not doing enough. All right, let's move on over to Naira. Naira?
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Naira Jordan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the Community and Social Impact Investment Directors with the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact. So for those not familiar with our company, American Family is a mutual insurance company that is headquartered here in Madison, Wisconsin. We have a 19-state footprint that includes our American Family, or AmFam as we call it, brand of products, which are auto, homeowners, life, commercial, farm, ranch insurance. And through merger and acquisitions, we've acquired other businesses and insurance companies. The most notable and probably most familiar to folks is the General. And it's through those activities that we have grown our enterprise to have a national presence beyond the AmFam brand, which means when we think about social impact, we also have a national footprint when we think about it. I've been with American Family for many years, and I've served in different roles across the organization, including overseeing our corporate responsibility strategy. And it was in that role, overseeing CR, that I was actually asked to be a part of a small team that spent over a year ideating on the possibility of what an institute could become, and that would be the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact. And it was created to be a social innovation hub that not only took a different look at how we have historically addressed social issues as an organization, but also how we deploy innovative solutions to solving these problems. And I would say, for me, this was that moment that my values and my professional life intersected into that, what I would call that sweet spot of purpose-driven work. My background is organizational design and social innovation, sustainability, and sociology, honestly centering in criminal justice. And I honestly did not think that I would be using that background to work for an insurance company. So I feel really fortunate to be a part of a company that is centering equity and how we think about our customers and our community. And in my current role as a social impact investment director, I get to amplify the incredible work that's already happening in communities. I get to meet people that understand the problems in their communities and therefore have line of sight to those solutions, and they inform our involvement in that work. They tell us where our participation will have the greatest positive impact in the community, And that's where we invest, and that's where we spend our time and we put our energy. So I'm thrilled to be here this afternoon as well as part of this panel of phenomenal Black women. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Naira. Thank you for that overview of the work that you do. And it's such important work. And, you know, I love when you said purpose-driven work, right? I think some of us work all of our lives hoping that our purpose and our work is going to intersect somehow. And to be living that and walking in that journey, that's just an awesome feeling. I feel like I too am doing purpose-driven work. So I understand what that feels like. And I get to do it every day with this next phenomenal woman, Alex Shade, who I'm getting to learn so much about. And Alex, I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Sharina. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed up today on a Friday around lunchtime. We are excited that we're able to record for those who aren't able to join us. And so thank you for inviting myself, Naira, and Ashley to use this space and our platforms to talk about the work that we are doing. That's number one. Number two, first of all, y'all are doing amazing things. I mean, I was listing off all of Ashley's things, and then Sharina, your comment around, I just don't know if I'm doing enough. And that's in and of itself. Let me stop everybody right there. We are enough just as we are. And I think all of us would agree, we could still be doing more. And so I am Alex Shade. My pronouns are she and her. I have been with CUNA Mutual Group, which is a financial services and insurance company, which is based and headquartered here in Madison, Wisconsin. I've been with the company. I just celebrated 3 years last Friday. So it's like 3+.1. So going into my 4th season, as Sharina would say. And similar to Ashley and Naira, my background is pretty dynamic, pretty robust. It's like, you know, your spice drawer, where I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, right? And all of those spices have helped me get to the place I'm at today, which is overseeing our company's corporate social responsibility. And for us, that includes our foundation, that includes our community relations, our workforce engagement, and then anything else that trickles down and helps to advance what we seek to do, which is to support and invest in communities. And at the heart of all of that are the people, the relationships, and our connections to the community. For us at CUNA Mutual Group, we are guided by a simple purpose, and that is that a brighter financial future should be accessible to everyone. So one of the ways that we live up and we live into that purpose is through our transformative philanthropy, which is focused on addressing the racial and socioeconomic disparities that exist in our communities. And I think what's so important about this topic is that we can't break down those barriers to building financial security unless we talk about race, we talk about the systems at play and the systems that have continued to uphold and address white supremacy. And I think we're going to get into it. And so enough about me. I know you've got some questions and we got a little bit limited amount of time, Sharina. So I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks for the intro.
Thank you. Thank you. I told you these ladies are phenomenal and they're dynamic. And so, yeah, I think we should just jump right into it and start with those heavy hitting questions. So every couple of years, it just seems like America experiences, or the nation experiences, some type of catastrophic event. And within the last 2 years, we've experienced a lot of events that was polarizing, right? One of them was the murder of George Floyd. We're in a pandemic. You know, some of us would say we're out of it, but we're still in a pandemic and experiencing that. We've had to deploy from our workforces and be isolated from our loved ones, right? And from that, we were forced to take a look at ourselves. And what we saw staring in the mirror coming back at us, it wasn't pretty, right? Those disparities were huge, and they had always been there, right? They had always been those numbers. And I feel like us in the Black community, because I identify with being Black, right? We saw that, we knew that, we felt like, well, dang, what have y'all been doing? Because this is what we were talking about all along, and we hadn't been heard. So out of that catastrophic event, I'll say, it feels like things were shaken up. And then those new buzzwords started arising, right? Transformational philanthropy, equity, centering Blackness. And we were like, isn't that really what we were talking about all along? So, Naira, I'm going to start with you though. Can you share with us how your journey really truly began with centering equity in your current organization?
Yeah, I thank you for laying that foundation too, because I think that's something that needs to be called out, that there were a lot of folks that jumped on that when it, was in front of us and we were all stuck in our living rooms and kitchens and couldn't get away from that conversation. I'll say for, American Family, it's been a journey that started a little bit ago. I will say more recently, to support, and I would say to amplify some of the work that we've already had been doing. We announced a significant multifaceted commitment, $105 million over 5 years to close equity gaps in the United States. And so we call this Free to Dream. It's the way that we want to be deliberate and take direct action to do our part to close equity gaps and drive community and social impact. Free to Dream is focused on 5 areas. It's economic empowerment, it's education and health equity, it's climate resilience, it's criminal justice reform, and it's workforce diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we feel like, again, this is a continuation of who we are as a mutual insurance company, which is something that is a distinction that's very important for us, because what that means is our policy owners are our owners, our policy holders. And so we do everything we can to support them while living up to the 3 arms of our mission, which are to inspire, protect, and restore dreams. And that was something we launched several years ago, which really has become the foundation of a lot of our philanthropic work and how we engage as a community, as an organization and community, because it's more than just American Family. It is intended to inspire, create, and support partnerships with other companies like CUNA Mutual and other organizations and the public sector to effectively address these social issues. And so for us, it's beyond the check. It's beyond just writing that check, slapping our logo on some things. We believe that it's our role to play in partnering with communities to expand equity. And so those efforts to invest to help everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, it's just something that centers everything we do. So we have our Dreams Foundation, which was launched. If we talk about how did we get here, our Dreams Foundation was launched in 2015, and that organization, that part of our giving, partners with communities to provide financial support through grant making and volunteerism. Its giving priorities center on lifelong learning and education, healthy youth development, economic opportunity. And then the Institute, which I've talked about, which is where my work resides, launched in 2018. And that organization works in 2 ways. First, we believe that venture capital investment provides an innovative vehicle for us to address bold social issues. And this is why we invest in high growth tech-enabled companies that are led by innovative founders and founders of color. And we take a social impact approach to our investing, which means we look for companies that will bring financial return, but are also social enterprises aligned to our strategic priorities, which I've talked about in equity and education, healthy youth development, climate, community resilience, and economic empowerment and justice reform. But we also recognize that capacity building and supporting organizations and experts that have been working tirelessly towards these causes is equally important in making a positive change in society. And so we've deliberately built this infrastructure to enact change, to shift how we've maybe traditionally and historically thought about philanthropy, to look at systems, to look at systems of oppression, and to provide opportunity for people to do good. So this also extends to the way we measure our workforce, our reporting to our board of directors. We've made clear that we're working to increase our racial ethnic diversity by 50% by the year 2024. And this means we are actively recruiting diverse talent, which includes individuals that have been justice involved. So the journey for us started well before 2020, but I will say following the murder of George Floyd, we saw the need to accelerate on our mission in this space.
Wow, you said a lot there. And I'm just in awe because I'm wondering truly what those conversations at that table would have been like or I wish I could have heard them. Alex get to hear some of those conversations. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. I'm working on me. So those conversations that have to happen internally in those organizations, right? And I'm gonna put a parking lot right there because I think this melds nicely into the journey similarly of CUNA Mutual. I know it a little bit, but just being able to hear it from Alex, who's walking it, living it. Same question to you. How did you start this journey?
I moved from Washington, D.C. area to Wisconsin to take on the position. Okay, all jokes aside, but let's still continue in this space a little bit of humor. By humoring me, if we went back prior to 3 years, so just towards the tail end of 2018, CUNA Mutual Group began its journey. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that CUNA Mutual Group and its foundation have a long-standing history, over 53, 54 years of investing in the communities and investing in people where we live and where we work and where we just coexist in. But when I think about going back to February of 2019, when I first started, that's really when the Phoenix was rising in terms of looking at our equity journey, because we knew we wanted to do philanthropy different, and we knew we wanted it to be authentic and much more impactful than those years prior. And so for us, and when I say us, I mean the foundation board, I mean the CSR team, I mean others that were part of us helping to talk about a strategy that would be best reflective of who we wanted to be to the community, because we knew that in order to truly affect change and be transformative in our philanthropy, we knew that our investments would need to be strategically focused on and aligned with the values that we were founded on. And for us at CUNA Mutual Group, that's that principle of people helping people. So throughout 2019, our foundation and the CSR team worked to dive in. We were having real, honest, open conversations around equity, using the word race, racism. I still remember two of my people lead skip levels going, I don't know if they're ready for that, Alex, but you use the word racism, you use the word justice. I'm like, well, if we're not going to talk about it now, when are we going to talk about it? That was an important statement, and it was an important question, because we knew it was time to challenge the past, to rewrite the rules, and to address the systemic injustices that have long been plaguing our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other marginalized communities. So we also then went to the source. We went into the communities. We talked. We listened. I think that myself alone, not even including the CSR team members, had over 200 or 222 meetings in like 10 months in 2019 to just listen and engage and ask questions so that I could better understand not only the landscape, but so that we could understand what the people had been feeling for so long. And that is, I think, something that is so important, because it ties into that overarching question that we asked, which was who is benefiting and who is being burdened. So through that like deep engagement and working and talking with our communities and listening, we were then able to zero in on our foundation's purpose. We were able to look at our mission, look at our values, and tie it back into the overall impact that we were seeking to accomplish and make. And that's where we landed on our 3 giving focus areas. And for us, those investment pillars are education, emergency aid, and economic security, because we know that those are some of the key barriers that inhibit and block people from building their own financial stability and to also addressing generational wealth.
Yeah, when you work for corporate America, right? And even if you don't work for corporate America, those real honest conversations have to be had. You have to have them with yourself. You have to have them with your community. You have to have them with the naysayers, right? Just so you can make sure that you're understanding you're in the right lane and where you're trying to go. And so that leads me to you, Ashley. I know you worked in various organizations and corporate organizations, but this is kind of one of the reasons that led you to start your own I Be Black Girl, right? Your own organization. Can you talk about what was going through your mind and through your head as you were thinking about equity and why you wanted to create an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and I appreciate the comments from everyone because it's so important around, right, like that individual journey of folks and what it looks like. I think for me, I want to raise the conversation up a little bit higher and talk about like the role and field of philanthropy, because to me, that's where the tension sits. So like I've worked in 2 private foundations. I've started a community-based organization that has a philanthropic arm. I currently work in corporate America on Black wealth creation and entrepreneurship, right? So I'm still working inside of institutions. And I think for me, the tension has always been, and I use the quote by Audre Lorde, can you dismantle the master's house with a master's tools? And that's what I think about, right? Like, what is the role in philanthropy? Can philanthropy really lean into the conversations around transformational equity, or can they lean into liberation and justice? I don't know if they have the depth, the leadership, or the vision to, right? And so I think we have to be honest around where philanthropy starts and stops. And then what does that really mean when we talk about liberation, specifically for Black communities, in the form of economics, in the form of housing, political power. And so I think for me, really unpacking that and unpacking the types of philanthropy and what it looks like, so whether you work in a family foundation, if you're at a community foundation, corporate, right? Like those also, and where philanthropies are situated, I think make a difference in how they lean into this journey or not, and what their perspective is. For me, working in these spaces and not being right a part of that that career path. So I'm a community organizer by trade. So I'm about the people. I literally got revolution tattooed on my wrist. So I don't want to be in these power structures. I want to dismantle. I want to think about these abolitionist frameworks, yet I find myself working within them. So thinking about what is my influence in creating that transformation, and leaving it better than how I found it. So then other Black women, other Black folks can come in, right, and take the work even further. And I feel like with I Be Black Girl, that was a vision of the Giving Circle. So my counterpart and one of my amazing friends, Jay Warren Teamer, who currently works at a corporate institution doing DEI and corporate responsibility, I had this thought about our Giving Circle, about 7 years ago. And so we both were working in philanthropy, both were the only Black women in our institutions, were a handful of women in the field in our state. And we were like, you know what, this is how decisions are being made. And folks are investing dollars and resources into intervention, solutions, ideas that are not curated by the people most impacted and don't truly resource the work. I mean, they want to give $10,000 to address, right, economic freedom for the Black community, like it hasn't been happening for centuries, and that's going to unravel. So, so it's like that kind of conversation. And so we thought about like, what if Black people saw themselves as philanthropists? Because the word is not accessible. You can barely even spell it, right? Like it doesn't feel like it's for us, and it cuts us out. And so we really wanted a place and an outlet where people trusted us to say, collectively, giving is a part of our culture, and we normally do it in that collective approach. And so if we pull our resources together, we have stronger collective power. We're able to then move towards an actualized vision that we all align on. And so let's create a giving circle, or let's have this space where we can pool and resource our dollars into organizations, and not just like official C3s. Like we invest in programs and projects that don't even have their C3 status, because we know that's a barrier. For folks that are doing this work in community that traditionally bootstrap, right? Like they're doing this work with their own dollars. And so I think that was a major piece and realization for us around what this work could look like and how we can start to talk about transformation at a time when we recognize our organizations in the field of philanthropy in itself is limited and has limited depth. in this area, and they're wrestling with it, right? Like the big national foundations you see, the Gates, that, you know, like everyone is wrestling with this conversation. And for me, my answer lies in that they don't have it. The answer is not with the big organizations or with philanthropy in general, but how can community really influence and use philanthropy as a tool to take back and do the things that we know need to happen.
You know what? Y'all are going to make me forget I'm moderating a panel over here, because I am literally trying to like pay attention to my questions, write notes. I want to say amen. I want to clutch my pearls at times. I don't even know where I'm going with all of this, but all I can say is this conversation was necessary today. I'm learning. I hope you all are learning out there. And Ashley, I think you set us up nicely when you talked about that quote from Audre Lorde, right? And you talked about, can you dismantle the master's house with the master's tool? I mean, I'm shook when you said that, right? It also made me think about when Martin Luther King said it. I don't even know that I was born yet when he said this, but he said philanthropy is commendable, right? But it's just not the cause, but it must not be the cause that the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic justice, right? Which make philanthropy necessary anyway. So do you ladies think that funders have forgotten about the economic injustices? And I think, Ashley, you alluded to it. And if so, and if you don't, then give a reason as to why or why not. Ashley, I'm gonna pick it right back on up with you, because I think you left off nicely.
You know, I think I'll speak from my personal experience, right? So navigating very white spaces, right, that are rooted in white supremacy and ideas where my thoughts, my lived experience, my expertise is not the norm, it's not the standard, or sometimes even invited in. I think that no, philanthropy does not reconcile that or have that centered in its approach. I think we were kind of chatting about this while we were waiting, right? Like, my job as a program officer is to give money. It's why philanthropy exists, right? And there's always these hoops in order to access money, or, you know, folks gatekeep. And I think that philanthropy has not reconciled its history and why it started. You know, it was a tax shelter for the wealthy, you know, and so I think philanthropy and this journey and recognizing the economic imperative that needs to happen to liberate communities. If philanthropy wants to go on in that journey and have that realization and awakening, it has to reconcile and restore what has happened, right? Like, and I think that then will infuse and decide, well, then this is our strategy and our path forward, or this is how we hire, or this is how we show up in community, or this is how we even look at our corpus. And we're not going to invest in things in the market that cause us to exist anyway, right? Like, we would totally change the way in which philanthropy would operate. And so I don't think philanthropy is aligning with Dr. King's quote. I don't think philanthropy really understands what that economic imperative and call in looks like. But my hope is, as we get more amazing professionals and folks from the field, like the folks on this panel, right? Like that the institutions will be pushed in that way, because they are an important player and partner in the work.
Yeah, I think, you know, when people on this call hear you say white supremacy and haven't reconciled its history, and they need to restore the reason, you know, justice and what that happens, I think people are scared, right, when they hear those terms. And so if we are going to live up to Martin Luther King's ode, I think we have to do what's called a reckoning. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. And Naira, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think some of those things can come to play.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Thank you for that. It's funny, when I was reflecting on this question, I kept coming back to truth and reconciliation. And essentially, I mean, we're, you know, funders, have they forgotten? I don't believe they've forgotten. I think this is more of an unwillingness to face truths, right? Economic disenfranchisement is real. When people vote for their own self-interest, protecting their own financial standing, while also protecting oppressive systems and policies through their vote, but then give large large amounts to charity, right? There's a disconnect, as Ashley said, where they get these, tax benefits and write-offs in doing so. So this is why, we have these, this persistent cycle of economic discrimination and segregation. And so ultimately, we're perpetuating these damaging cycles. And what kept coming to mind for me in reflecting on this, for some reason, this connection to allyship. So we heard that a lot in 2020, right? Everybody wanted to be an ally, how to be a better ally, what does it mean? And so there were all these conversations. Well, allies don't vote for systems that continue to instill injustices in our communities. Allies, funders, for them to be allies in this work, they have to understand the root cause and face these uncomfortable truths. And as Ashley said, recognize where philanthropy came from. So I believe that there is a lot of ignorance of history. And I feel like we're at a place where funders can't continue to fall back on that anymore. If we were truly centering the work of equity and justice, you just can't say, oh, I didn't know, or I didn't understand, or that was before me. Funders have to examine their own miseducation. And so I think about how they are engaging with community members and leaders to understand not only the needs of the community, but also determine whether or not deep impacts are being made. So, again, we can't sit in our nice headquarters and doll out checks and not understand, because we feel proudly about education, we feel proudly now about social justice. You have to get close and understand what those root cause issues are, and understand and connect with communities to understand where you make that impact. So we refer, and this has been a journey for us, right? We refer to it as partners in progress, and how can we be that how can we be that in a way where there is true balance of power? How can we, our foundation, for example, leverages trust-based philanthropy. They enable organizations within our community to make those decisions on the best use of funds, tell us where that need is. I think the other part of that for us is to identifying those grassroots smaller organizations. I think part of the perpetuation of some of this is we have large legacy nonprofits that are doing good work, but we get comfortable giving to these organizations. So what are those organizations that are connected to community, rooted in community, that again, you can't identify sitting in a headquarters? You have to get out, you have to talk, you have to listen, more importantly, and identify where we can drive change. And so getting closer to that. So, I feel like as far as proximity goes for us, it goes back to that listening and learning and partnering effectively. I have to say this was a question I had to reflect on and had to step away from, had to come back to, and just because I felt like there was so much in it, because I think this gets back to, some of the discussions we've already had about, you can't talk about equity and justice and not talk about racism. You can't talk about white supremacy. And that's where it gets uncomfortable. And I feel like we have to be there. We have to just say, here we are, and have these conversations. And that's and funders and companies have had to step in that space. So that one made me tired after I had to reflect on that one. I needed to a glass of wine or a nap after that one, because it was deep.
Yeah,
you drank the whole bottle. Come on now.
Right.
You know me too well, Alex.
Yeah, I feel like you two know each other too well, and y'all are synergistic. No wine yet, but we gonna have some after this, because these conversations, I'm telling you, sometimes I'm just like, dang, did she really just say that? Yep, she really did just say that. Did she go there? Yes, she really did. But Alex, because I get to sit in the space that I sit in, I know what all is being prepared and done to get our board members ready and prepared. And there's always some education in there that you give as pre-work. And I understand that funders don't necessarily understand that they have to think about history. They have to go get that education. What would you say to funders who are like, we can just keep doing it the same way we're doing it, and we don't have to pay attention to history? What would your advice be to those individuals who think that They don't have to change. They don't have to do anything different.
I don't think I can say what I really want to say right now in this space without dropping a lot of swear words. But I'm going to talk about the ego. Oftentimes, I mean, all of us have an ego in some way, shape, or form. And the very fact that someone would question me saying that I got to go and relearn something, or I got to go learn something, or I have to go and unlearn something. I'm unlearning stuff every single second of the day, and I am constantly challenging myself. My response back would be like, let's go grab a cup of coffee, or let's go grab get a glass of wine. Because for me, it's the psychology that I am trying to understand of that person. I'm also an optimistic realist. Anybody who knows me, they're like, Alex, I just don't know how you see the good in some people when I just cannot see the forest from the trees. So I live into that. Okay. That I know the world isn't perfect, but at the same time, I love that my optimism I can't use this word, will combat the other piece of the reality. So it's asking the questions of, why do you think that? Help me better understand why you may be so defensive with actually listening, learning, and diving in an area where I have some friends, I have some colleagues, I have some peers that are like, it is not my job to spoon feed people. And I'm like, that's great, you take that stance. But for me, I want to know where people are coming from, because it helps me to better understand where we can go together. One of the things that Naira, you had touched on was the proximate piece. And for us, and for me, I'm constantly asking, how are you getting, and staying proximate, both as a foundation, as a company, as an individual leader, as a contributor, as somebody who is not just doing this work because we had a paycheck to do it, or because we have motivations that are aligned with our core values and our beliefs, but it's how are you doing that in your own home community and in your own personal setting. And that comes back into that question of economic justice. It's that idea that the economy will be more successful if it's fair. The economy is not fair right now. We're constantly dealing with homelessness, poverty, income inequality based on gender, based on race. I want the statistics that help that individual who may be ignorant continue to uphold them, versus the statistics that show, again, you have more individuals, more organizations, those legacy organizations that Naira had mentioned, where we know that the data points show that there is a lack of funding and support for women-led individuals of color and other underrepresented groups. You can't negate that data. That data is out there. So when I think about, what are we funders doing? I would say the four of us on the call, yeah, we're rethinking the way that we invest in communities, the way that we show up, the way that we use our microphones and our platforms, and calling those systems and those individuals out. And that's not easy work. That's tiring work. But it's work that I know I'm called to do on so many different levels. And all the other experiences that I have, similar to Ashley, once a community organizer, always a community organizer. So it's taking those things in, having run nonprofit organizations, having been a fundraiser, having been a program coordinator, volunteer coordinator, being a contributor, an investor. I try and take all those pieces and facets into my life, into doing what we're talking about, which is this transformational, non-transactional, authentic, community-centered work.
Everything you three have added is what people really needed to hear, but I still want to go deeper, and I still want to get to the heart of this. So this is a question I'm going to drill down on you ladies for. And I know that people are probably going to be like, oh my God, why did she ask that question? When you talk about legacy organizations and brand organizations who have the name recognition, those organizations push back and get so upset when you actually sit down and have those conversations about, hey, we may no longer support and provide financial resources to you in the way that we have. And we're going to shift our focus and center in equity or BIPOC-led organizations. Can you share what you actually need to say to organizations? Not even just to get there okay, but just to say, hey, look, this is the way that we're going, and kind of what others can anticipate as a response. Because I think people really struggle with that, right? They've made these relationships, these pseudo friendships, whatever you want to call it. They've idealized about going to a softball game or having some wine with them. And so now they don't want to give them the hard information of, we may need to look at funding differently. How can you help funders on this call specifically prepare for those conversations? What would you tell them to say? And I'm going to start off with Naira.
I think part of this goes back to understanding your values and the priorities with your funding. I think these conversations are never comfortable, but I also feel like being honest and transparent to say, we have centered equity. We take the lens, and this is something we do whether we're looking to invest in a tech company or partner with a nonprofit or an academic institution. What equity gap is this closing? How is this helping community? And we put that lens on, like, what equity gap is this closing? And for us, that's a criteria that we can use. And we are very open and transparent with anybody that reaches out to us that has been someone we have funded in over multi-years. And the new organizations, how is this going to impact community? And so I feel like when you are clear on what your values and your priorities are, and you can, articulate that alignment and why it no longer exists with that organization, I feel like that's how you have that discussion, and being very clear on also that, are there other ways to support that organization that may not be a funding organization? If it's an educational institution, for example, that supports K through 12 achievement gaps, if that's something that isn't in alignment with you, are there other ways you can amplify the message of that organization? Are there other ways you can influence change in systems that would support that organization? So I think it's even thinking broader beyond the funding, even though that's very important. I always go back to transparency, honesty, and here's how we're thinking about our alignment. Here's how we're thinking about our funding. And here's why, if you're pulling funding from that organization, this no longer aligns to our approach and how we're supporting community and centering equity. And I also think that funders have influence. And if you are truly having those discussions with nonprofits, for example, and you're talking equity, I would also hope that organization is thinking, maybe we're not centering equity. Maybe we need to think differently about our approach to how we are serving community, or how we're thinking about serving community. So maybe that's a way to have that organization think about the work that they're doing, and is it still serving the community members and the individuals that they believe they're serving? Are they proximate enough to understand that? So that's my off the head response.
Yeah, and so Ashley, I think, thank you, Naira, for that. Ashley, I think you said it best too, right? About how funders make people jump through hoops and burden them about just, asking them for funding. For your perspective of IB Black girl, right? Can you share some of the things that just frustrate the heck out of individuals, nonprofits? Because I really want to have an open, honest conversation about the things that are being asked and required, that emotional text that pulls on us all when we are looking, seeking, trying to figure out, do we have a partner in this journey, or am I going to have to do tap dance and hoops to just get $2? Because really, that's what I feel like it is, $2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on really quick something that Naira said, which I think is important, is really around, I think your question lends itself to understanding that foundation strategy, right? So if you have a clear strategy around, and not a strategy of what you're investing in, but like, what is our philanthropic approach? Do we do multi-year? Are we doing programs versus operating? This is how we assess alignment. Are we having, you know, our longest grant that we'll give is 10 years? Is your portfolio strategic or responsive? Like that, I think answers that question, because then it makes it really clear that, you know, these are longstanding organizations. And at the end of the day, they have clients that are affected too. So you shifting your resources, no matter from a longstanding traditional go-to organization, then to a new up and coming community-based organization, like it has implications regardless. And your job and responsibility of the funder is to take care of that. So it should not be a surprise if you are changing your funding priorities. It should not be a surprise if funding is ending. You should build an exit plan that allows for you to step down in your investment, to help introduce them to like funders that maybe that they can work with in order to fill that gap, because philanthropy created, right, that scramble, that scarcity mindset. So I think philanthropy has to be accountable in how they show up in that. To Alex's point, like I've been a fundraiser. I fundraise now for Ivy Black Girl. I've been on the grant making side, and I think for me, what frustrates me is when the access to philanthropy feels very gatekeepy, right? So if I look on your website, and ideally there should be some sort of, now, especially with how technology is used, some sort of information that gives people the criteria of what you fund or how you fund. And if I'm supposed to assess if there's some alignment, what is that pipeline to get in and just to have that conversation? I think it's hard when you say like, well, we're aligned. Why aren't dollars moving here? Or we're aligned and everyone that works here is a mystery. Or we're aligned, you know, again, because I am tasked with assessing that. And I have to send a letter of intent and I don't know who received it, if I'm getting it back or what's going on. So I think that lack of transparency and accessibility is an issue, because again, if we're talking about traditional philanthropy that has a professionalized staff, right? Most of the time it's not the people's money, right? Like you're working for the institution that was created to reinvest in community. You would think part of your job is that community engagement, and you don't always see that. And I think that is a hard part, because the no is okay, right? Like if we talk about it, it's not a fit. That means that I can take my resources and energy and direct that to a funder that is more aligned. But just that song and dance of even getting in is really problematic. And then I would say aligning once you have funded, the dollar amount with the request. If you are giving a $10,000 one-year programmatic grant, why are you asking me about my long-term impacts and asking me to evaluate it? You're not funding evaluation. You're only my partner for a year and you gave me $10,000, right? And by the way, it took me 4 hours to do the grant application. So I think that expectation alignment is really important, because when we look at our grants, for instance, so when we give out grants through our giving circle, we're giving out up to $7,500 grants. So again, to smaller individuals or organizations that are benefiting Black women, femmes, and girls. We give them direction on like, hey, can you just name that this program is supported by Ivy Black Girl? Here's our logo, tag us and stuff if you need help. Here's the information. This is like the compliance requirements from like, if you're not a C3, what does this mean for tax implications if you are, right? Because sometimes that's difficult for people to navigate. And then we check in with them after that year ends. Like we don't have a long-standing report. We don't do any of those things because again, we know that this $7,500 that we're giving, we should not be asking people for hours and hours and hours of their time, because it takes them away from the work. It's saying that we don't trust you. We don't trust that you're going to do right with this little bit of money that we know would advance the work. We need to micromanage it. And so my hope is that funders and people that are on the front lines of philanthropy really think about how they can show up in partnership with community, be really accessible, ask, you know, what is it that you need from me? Is my grant agreement in the way that it's structured? Does that work for you? What does that look like with your timeline? Like truly be a partner, because I think that makes a difference. And then it makes it easier on us, the people that are doing the work, to then really say like, okay, they get it, they trust me. And now I've been empowered to keep doing the work that I'm doing.
Woo! what you said. I am like, yes, I'm so glad that we don't, I'm not gonna steal Alex's thunder, but I'm so glad we don't ask for those reports because I sit on other funding organizations and the reports in itself, I'm like, what do you need this for? Who's the gatekeeper of this? How long are you gonna keep it? And if they don't fill out the report, you can't come back. Alex, take us home with all of this, right? And your ideation around that trust-based philanthropy, because we have those honest conversations.
Yeah, we do. I mean, and I'm just going to put it out there. Sometimes you just have to use the words, you are out of scope. You are out of scope. And then I like to turn the question back around on an organization and ask, what is your understanding of when we say centering equity? If they can't answer that question, if they're not understanding the way that CUNA Mutual Group's foundation and this company has centered and is centering BIPOC, women-led, other marginalized, underrepresented, marginalized groups, this is not the place that you need to be seeking funding. I don't remember which one of you said it, but when it, I think it was Ashley, when it does come to that step down, sometimes it's like enough is enough. You go back to the data and you go, I've given this organization or we've given this organization X amount of dollars and we've been funding for how many years? Are they still in alignment? Sometimes the facts are the facts and you can't negate them. So it is being able to then just say, and I don't think all funders do that. I don't think all funders actually say, you know what? The work that your organization is doing is fantastic. What your mission is good, it's solid, but it is not in alignment with our strategic plan or with our focus areas or with our values and with our beliefs and where we're heading. Because I think one of the most beautiful parts about the way we're doing transformative philanthropy is the fact that we're constantly pivoting. We're looking at things like, so I think about our application process, right? It's looking at it and going, can we eliminate another question? What is the information that we need that is crucial for us to better understand an organization that we may not be aware of or know of? And I think that that's important because you got to take a step back, right? It's getting that ego out and going, where can we actually fine tune? It's being able to ask our partners and our funders, how long did it take you to complete the application, right? Like the team I work with, they know. I'm like, test it out. Let's see how long it took to do that application. Was it 30 minutes or less? How was the upload feature? Do we need the upload feature? Challenging ourselves. Then having organizations go, hey, do you mind testing this out before this goes live, right? I trust in them to give me honest feedback as they trust in us to give, to be truthful within the space of how and where we make those investments. I also think about the way that we show up that Ashley and both Naira had talked about, where sometimes the dollars may not be there, but our time as volunteers, our time as subject matter experts when it comes to areas I suck, social media. I hate social media. I'm not good at it. I mean, anybody on this call knows, like, you're not going to see a post of Alex, like, or maybe you will every 3 months, or maybe I'll go like a sprint, for 3 weeks, I'm in it. I'm not good at that. I acknowledge that. And so it's being able to say, hey, you know what? You are fantastic in marketing, or you're great in comms, or you're really strong within this IT space and coding. Here are a couple organizations that we're partnering with who have said to us, they're missing something. There's a gap that can be filled. Can we support in this capacity? So it's being able to bridge and make those connections to our workforce, leveraging our engagement resource group. We have 13 of those. When it comes to showing up in terms of sponsorships, right? I mean, you can cut a check all day, and that's like fine for some organizations, but organizations that are out there on the front lines, they want somebody who's going to stand with them. They're going to want somebody who's going to sit at the table with them. They're going to want somebody who's going to like call back an RSVP, even if you can't attend, to at least acknowledge, hey, I see you, we see you. I can do this, I can't do this. So I feel like I went back to your previous question, Sharina, and I didn't answer the current question. Did I do that? It's a Friday, everybody.
It's totally okay, because I think we have a lot of questions that are just burning. And as you was talking about it, and I had some questions pop up in my own head when Ashley said that philanthropy created the scarcity mindset in the first place. And just, I was like, oh my goodness, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't back up Ashley to that, about how you feel like philanthropy created this scarcity mindset. And we kind of just touch on that, because I think that's really what people are. People are afraid that there's not going to be enough for them to do that work. And so let's just talk about that. Let's have an honest conversation about that scarcity mindset and how philanthropy contributed to it.
Well, and we
Yeah.
oppose it too. We pit them against each other.
Come on, Alex.
I'm sorry. I didn't know I was mute. I wasn't muted. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
I agree, Alex. And I think, I think that goes back to the role of philanthropy. Institutions, whether you're a family foundation, a private foundation, corporate, like, you have finite resources. And so within that finite bucket of money, you're making a decision about what would advance your mission and what projects align. And I think in the process of that, right, and it's so nuanced and complex, then decisions and signals are made. So if a philanthropic organization invests in this type of organization with this type of leadership, they're signaling an unwritten rule that that's the right organization. They have the right structure, that they have the right impact. And so it cues other funders that may be in the market that says, you know what, we also have a similar portfolio, we're going to support that. We have to look at the historical structure of boards. Boards of nonprofits were normally used for fundraising. And so who has access to generational wealth? Who has access to the type of social capital that is needed in order to propel that organization forward? So you see, now old white men still on those boards, because that was generally the model of who could hold and access wealth, or how value was determined for that organization, right? They weren't thinking about the lived experience value or the community connections in the same way. And then it's like, to Alex's point, like philanthropy says, well, there can only be one, especially with communities of color. Like, as many folks that are working on like economic development things, there could be multiple organizations that are similar, that may or may not collaborate. It's fine. When you talk about communities of color, especially led by folks of color, it could only be one. It's like, well, why do we get one? Like, first off, there's enough work to go around. And two, like, there's not one good organization that should get all the funding. Like, what does it mean to truly be intentional and strategic about your investment that allows and meets your goals as a foundation? Because we know that has to happen, as well as community-based goals. And so, I mean, just that scarcity mindset and the approach of how wealth is given out, and the original intention of philanthropies to be tax shelters, like, all of that influences what we see today, and around this deficit and scarcity mindset that philanthropy perpetuates. And again, until folks can name and sit in that messiness, and can name and sit with how their individual institutions, as well as the field, has caused harm or shows up in that way, you can't move forward, because you're acting like it doesn't exist, where especially our communities are feeling the brunt and weight of it. So it's unfortunate, and I'm hoping, right, that the folks that are listening in or will watch later will feel really empowered to be like, you know what, let's have this conversation internally with my folks, and let's just start to pulse check. Let's start to see how we create that transition. And also, I hope that community says, you know what, we're not going to wait on philanthropy. Philanthropy has a scarcity mindset and puts us against each other, but we are going to show up differently. We're going to do collaborative grant efforts. We're going to, do redistribution of funds. Like, we're going to do those things in order for the answer to live with us. And we're not going to wait on philanthropy, an institution that has never really served us or was designed for us, to come in and do the right thing.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that, because that is one of the main reasons why 24/7 Black got started, right? Not to put this on 24/7 Black, but we were just like, we were tired. We were tired of waiting and continuously having those conversations, typically that take 2 to 3 years to be planning, so they can cross every I, dot every T, guard against every type of risk. That made no sense to us when we knew people were suffering. I think my cousin Joy says it the best when she says, dang, if you got cut and you were bleeding out, you wouldn't wait until 2 months later to put a Band-Aid on it. You'd put the Band-Aid on it right now and you'd get to work to try to mitigate that bleeding. And I'm getting so passionate here because I'm just like, I'm fired up with this, right? I'm fed up with these kinds of conversations, but I truly think that if we're going to send any kind of message here today, before we start getting some questions from those who are in attendance right now, if you want to put something in the chat, go ahead and do that. I'm going to pay attention to that. But if funders are truly going to begin to focus on centering equity, can you all give what you would recommend as the top 3 things that organizations can do themselves to get ready to start to do this work and do it authentically? And Alex, I'm gonna come on back to you because I feel like you was like jumping at the bit, ready to say something, and I cut you off.
Well, you took us to a congregation, and so it was like I was having a moment of I'd be remiss if I didn't go back and say it's also that power, it's that power over mentality, it's that savior mentality, where you also have some philanthropic entities that are like, we're going to be the only one to do this, and I'm not going to tell my fellow foundation or corporate foundations or private foundation colleagues about this amazing organization, right? So we also serve as gatekeepers to our peers by not informing them about opportunities or organizations. And so that may be one of my 3 gems or pearls that I drop. It's also, it's building. You have to take time to build the relationship. I say it all the time. It's like dating, right? Like when I first met Naira, I think I said to her, I was like, do you want to go out on a date? Like, I want to get to know you. Hopefully maybe you want to get to know me. But it took a partner that both of our organizations are funding and supporting. And neither of us knew each other, but we knew of each other. And it's that the organizational partner trusted in the work that we are doing alongside them to make an introduction. And even in and of that self, I was like, this is so transformative. Like, you're introducing me to another funder where we just had not ever had that opportunity to meet. So that's where I think taking time to really spend getting to know your community, which is the future organizations, which are the people. It's going in and going back and being consistent. It's not just like, oh, okay, well, I went down to Omaha. Sorry, Ashley, that was the first thing I thought of, first city. And I saw the East Side. Oh, okay, so you saw the East Side. Like, who'd you meet with? What streets did you walk? Where did you go and eat food? Where'd you go and grab coffee or tea? Where'd you stay? Did you read the paper? What have you done? Right? Like, you can't say you know the community. And I get it. Not all of us have that luxury or liberty to be able to travel everywhere. Not every organization has a program officer, but there are different ways that you can really get to know your community so that you can get to that place where you are proximate. And the other piece of it is it's invest. And I say this all the time. Sometimes I just want to know about the money. I do want to know what they're asking for. And then I go, well, ask the question, I don't really think that's the amount that you want to really ask for. I will say, ask for the value of your worth. What is the amount? What can we be investing in? We may not be able to meet you if you're saying $10 million. Our budget is not that big, but it is like claim what that amount is, because I know, and we know you are working hard and the struggle has been real and the gates have been upkept. And sometimes there are gates in front of other gates. So yeah, validate your people, trust the work that they're doing. We don't require, the reporting. We try and make the application as simple as possible. We try and fund at a level of respect. And if it's not the full amount, pretty darn close to it. And yeah, that's what I would say. Those are my 3 or 5. I don't even know how many I've dropped.
I love it. I love it because value and respect, I think, go interchangeable, which I'm going to get on over to you, Naira, because you talked about this all throughout your answers in your conversation of how, you're free to dream and you want to inspire, protect, and restore that dream. So, how was that all melded into centering equity? What can you leave funders with here today to say, you know what, if you're going to be honest and serious about this work, here's these three things that you really need to do?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you got to look inside your own house. So if you're talking about funding with equity and centering that, I think you have to turn that mirror around and see whether or not equity is centered in your organization. When you think about your employees, are you an equitable and inclusive organization for them? I will say for us, as we want to grow our enterprise, we do that by hoping to have an inclusive culture. So that is what we work for. We also look at DEI from a perspective of race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, but also just as involved individuals. Are we accessible for employment to individuals that have been incarcerated or may have a criminal record? So we think about our values, what's important for us as an organization when we look at our hiring, but also consumers. Are our products accessible? So we're, again, looking at our products to understand where we may have barriers for people doing business with us and assessing our products. So if you're a foundation or a funder that's connected to a corporation, I think doing that internal work is important. I think the second thing for us is it's part of our strategy. So when we talk about corporate social responsibility, we talk about philanthropy or giving, that is all part of our overall corporate strategy. So we don't have a DEI strategy and a corporate responsibility strategy, and then a strategy as a company to reach our business results. All of that is integrated. We know that we can't win or be a profitable organization if we aren't centered in this work. And so all of those things are prioritized and take center stage together. And so that's also important for us. And then I would say, we've talked about this so much, but I think it probably can't be emphasized enough. Companies have to get close to the issues and to the communities to understand the unique challenges that these communities face. And so it starts at the top. So I could say for us, when we first started this work, and I said I was part of a small team that was kind of ideating and figuring out what our institute would be and how we would think about equity. Our CEO, our board of directors, our senior leaders traveled down to Alabama, and we went to the Equal Justice Institute, met with Bryan Stevenson, talked about his work, talked about how we have gotten where we are today as a country, to be the most incarcerated country on the globe, from slavery to Jim Crow segregation to the war on drugs and everything that led us here, and had to sit in that space and have that uncomfortable conversation. We brought Bryan Stevenson to our leadership meetings, but I think more importantly, we have education and training. And I know when I say education and training, people go, here we go, DI training, but I think really deep rooted in understanding where we have, how we have gotten here. And it's not comfortable. Not everybody is happy. Not everybody wants to hear these conversations, but if we are a company that exists within a community, we have to, if we feel like we want people to do business with us, we have to understand this. So I think proximity, but not just proximity, but also doing the work internally. It is a continuous process. We are not perfect. We are not there, but I think it is something that's necessary. If you're really going to say you're centering equity in your work, you have to look in-house, make it part of who you are as an organization, and then get out there and really understand what issues, and not project it from headquarters or miles and miles away from where the real work is happening.
When you said Jim Crow to slavery, or slavery to Jim Crow, however you said it, just the chills just came over my body, because I feel like that's truly the work and the shoulders of our ancestors speaking to us about, we're in the right space, I'm doing the right work, keep going, because sometimes this I'm gonna just say it, this shit is hard. Right? It is hard. The emotional tax is weighing on us. I mean, it's just hard. And Ashley, I wanna come to you because I think you share a unique perspective about being asking for those dollars and knowing that funds need to come in so that you can continue to do the collective work that you're doing with IB Black Girl. What would you give as advice before we open it up to questions? What would you give advice to funders about this to get their house in order?
Yeah, I would say that one, I agree with Alex and Ira, and I appreciate your perspectives and your call to actions. Two, I think I would be remiss if I didn't name that the verdict for Kim Porter came out today around the murder of Dante Wright. And that it is another reminder, right? Because it's more accessible because we have technology, but it's another reminder that the institutions that we look to for justice, that we look to for protection, that we look to for liberation were not designed for us and do not provide that, right? And so philanthropy in itself is an institution. And so I'm sitting with this tension of what the experience my community is feeling. I'm sitting with the experiences of the work that we do at IB Black Girl and the exhaustive nature of this work. And so I would first say to other folks that are out there fundraising and are Black folks leading this work on behalf of Black people, we have to prioritize ourselves and we have to center rest and abundance, and that is okay. In the social sector, there is a grind culture that if you are not exhausted and broke, that you are not doing the work, and that is just not true. I'm on the board for Women's Funding Network, and it's an organization that is a membership-based organization that oversees and helps to manage and support all of the women's funds and foundations internationally. And we just had a retreat and we were talking about the Black woman actually that started this organization with 20 other foundations from women of color. She helped to catalyze the environmental movement and she died at 47 years old. And I can only guess that it's from the weathering, from the racism, right? From all the things that she carried and encountered on behalf of her people. And this work can no longer be at the consequence of us. So for the folks that are out there hustling for the dollars, meeting with these fundraisers, like we have to set clear boundaries that protect our peace and our health, right? Because if we're no longer here, the work doesn't continue anyway. And that the last thing is that funders need to recognize that this is not just transactional work, right? People are invested in their community because they either share the experience, they see what's happening in community, and they want to provide leadership and vision for something different. And so when you approach this work, it can't be transactional. You have to be invested in a way that meets the needs and actual needs of the nonprofit. You have to build a relationship that is rooted in trust and transparency. And then you just have to be honest and clear. Don't waste people's time if you don't plan on funding them. If you are going to fund them, right size the requests and expectations for how much money you are giving. And don't think that we are going to address economic liberation that is rooted in the historical inequities in 2 years and 5 years with this amount of money. Like it's embedded into who we are as a society, and we have to navigate that. And so there's a lot of pieces and elements and complexities to this work, and you just got to find what that looks like for you and go deep in your leadership and how you work to create, just and transformational philanthropy.
Ladies, Ashley, thank you for that. And thank you for calling out and reminding us of Dante Wright and Kim Porter and that decision. I was not aware. And so immediately when you said it, I can probably speak for Alex and Naira because I know them a little bit well. I think that just made my heart sink, right? Because I know, and I too live in a world where these systems that we want to protect us do not. Where we feel that emotional toll and tax. And when you told the story about the creator of the women's organization and how she died at 46, and I'm just thinking, you know what, Sharina, you've never said, I'm going to protect my space and get my rest and abundance and peace, because you are right. We do feel like we have to hustle and get out there and get these dollars and think about that. And we carry all the weight. And sometimes we're picking up our community and putting them on our back and we're going forward. But I have to just say, no more today. And I don't mean to get emotional, but it's no more today. We can't continue to operate in this manner. So for all of you that have joined us, I thank you. I know that there's a question in the chat. I'm gonna pass it over to Joy so I can get myself together. You asked the question and I'm gonna be right back. But I hope y'all are taking this in. I hope y'all just didn't come on here today so you can hear what we had to say, write some fancy notes, go talk about this back in your water cooler conversations. I need you to act and get it together. And I know that that's the wrong thing to do on here, to be saying that you got to get it together, but you got to get it together because you're killing us and it's not worth it. It's not. I'm gonna turn it over to you, Joy. You take it.
No, wow. You ladies have, I knew it was gonna be have a huge impact, but I don't even think I expected it to be at the level it was. I just thank you ladies for lending your time this afternoon. I've been taking notes. Fun with respect, be honest, transparent about what your goals are. Make sure people have a way to connect with you. Also rest. And I have to say, that one is a struggle for me because I feel that there is such urgency and need. And there's been such a long length of time, like Sharina said, with that I felt as a community, we've been bleeding, that sometimes, I'm like, we gotta get things done now. And actually, Ashley, to your comment about that, my daughter, my oldest, she graduated from NYU, and in her undergrad, she was doing research on Alzheimer's. And she said, Mom, I did all this research. And I was like, well, why is it higher in communities of color, particularly Black people? And she said, well, there's higher amounts of white matter in our brains. And I said, oh, wow. Do they know what causes it? And she said, we don't sleep. That antage that, you got to work harder, you got to do all of these things. It's literally not only killing us, it's causing illnesses and all these other things, Mom. You got to rest, Mom. And I was like, okay, I hear that. And so Ashley, thank you for that today. I definitely received that message and I received that word and I received the word and message from all of you ladies today. Again, I knew this was going to be great. We've got about 7 minutes left. Wow, to the verdict. I'm much like Sharina. I hadn't saw that yet either. And so we just want to send our love and our support out right now for the families and friends that are dealing with that verdict in our community as a whole. One of the questions, and I know we only have about 7 minutes left. One of the questions though that came from our social media was, if you're in an organization that historically hasn't even had conversations about centering equity, right? And in this moment, we know it's become the popular term, but you feel like it really needs to happen. And there may be a space for you to come in and start these dialogues. Where would each of you recommend? And again, everybody has about a minute and a half, but where would you recommend for an organization that hasn't done this and they're wanting to get started and they understand the need and their eyes have been open to the things that we've been saying for generations, but they now are in a position to do something? Where would you recommend they start? And I'll actually start with you, Naira.
Yeah, I would say I think that qualify around an organization that's willing and ready to start. Because my first thought was, if you're in an organization and you feel that they need to start having these conversations, but they're not ready to have those conversations, my first thought went to, is that the organization for you? To everything we're talking about here right now, like, is that worth your mental well-being to try to push against something that's not ready to get pushed? I will say a lot of our conversations started, we have affinity groups and business resource groups. And to be honest, I think a lot of the discussion started there. And a lot of our employees who were part of those groups, particularly our Black and Brown employees, when Black Lives Matter, was out there, and we weren't hearing it inside the organization. Someone asked the question of why. I think simultaneously with that, we had leadership that was starting to become more educated here in Madison, Wisconsin. I think it was either or before the prep of this call, and I'll wrap up, because I know we don't have a lot of time. We were talking about the Midwest and some of the beliefs around the Midwest. Well, Madison, Wisconsin is on just about every list of wonderful, beautiful places to live. And it's easy always in the top 5 at least, until you start digging and you realize that's not the case for Black and Brown communities. And there was a Race to Equity report that was released several years ago that pulled the Band-Aid off of all of that. And so I think that was a spark for a lot of organizations to start to understand that. So I say it's probably both starting at that employee level, pushing and having those conversations, but I think there also needs to be some education at the top to understand what's happening in the communities around them.
Thank you, Naira. That's so true. And I agree, that at this point, you probably do need to evaluate, because we do need to place a higher amount on your peace of mind. Peace of mind is so important. And Alex, for you, what would you say? Where would someone start if you're at an organization that, most of you are actually at organizations that had been doing this journey and understood that they need to get have more urgency and be more intentional. But for someone that is at an organization that hasn't, I'm in Iowa, so let that sit there. So a lot of communities here in Iowa are dealing with a lot there's just a lot going on here. And so a community based in Iowa that understand this work is still important, where would you recommend they start?
Yeah, I think, Naira, there was a piece of, if it's for yourself and you think about the organization that you commit 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 16 hours every day to, and that organization doesn't align with your core values and beliefs, you deuces, it's time to go. That's not the place for you. But I think that it starts at the top, starts with your CEO, it starts with, and even be your CEO's bosses, right? Their own board of directors, and having that conversation. When I think about CUNA Mutual Group, and I wasn't here at that time when our now current CEO, Bob Trunzo, came on board. He was intentional when he declared that inclusion was going to be a part of our company's core values. That intentional effort, that doubling down in terms of looking at how are we going to transform the status quo? How are we going to create opportunities for those who have been historically marginalized? That is where it's got to start. And it's not just his alone to shoulder or to burden. It is each one of ours. And it's taking that time to take a step back and go, is our house in order? Are we still moving towards what we've said we have set out to do?
Thank you, Alex. I think it's so important that your leadership is involved in as well. And that does set a stronger tone. And for you, Ashley, where would you recommend, or some of the organizations you've been a part of, how did you push them forward towards equity?
I don't have anything to add. I love what both Naira and Alex said, and I appreciate their comments and perspectives. I think they said it beautifully.
I'm going to jump in here right quick. I done got me together right quick. But I do think it's clear about what everyone said, but I just want to wrap it up and make sure that everyone heard this right. I want you to get clear on what it is that you want to do, who you want to be to the community, who you say you are, and then how are you living into that? I want you to get real clear on that. If you don't get nothing else out of this conversation today, you get clear about that. And once you get clear about that, then you will start to move forward, because I think that the problem is people aren't clear and they're not asking themselves those real questions about it. And then if you don't know the answers, go get people to get you those answers and help you. But don't get someone to say, because I just need another Black person to be on this board. If you say you're helping the Black community, it don't make sense that the decisions that are being made are by no one who's in the Black community, don't have those lived experiences, don't live there, not part of the community, scared to drive through it, haven't eaten at a shop. You got to get clear, you got to get proximate, and you got to stay proximate. So I know we're at time, Joy. I'm gonna let you go ahead and wrap it up, but that's where people got to start.
No, no worries. Well, we are exactly at time, and I want to be very aware of you guys Friday. But thank you, thank you, thank you for this powerful conversation. Thank you, Naira, Alex, Ashley, Sharina, for doing this Friday in this moment. Again, another thing that you guys are all doing the work, and you took the time out to share with us today. So we really, really appreciate that. Appreciate you being here, and your presence adds so much value to us out there watching from either the app or online. We appreciate you also joining us this Friday. It will be available on our YouTube page. And then also next week, we do our conversation on skilling up and how we can help advance more people of color in leadership roles for employers. So join us for that conversation as well. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thanks so much again. Have a good Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.